when we're in a position where, and I think this is where you and I connect a lot, when you're in a position to positively impact people, you go out of your way to do that because that pays you back tenfold.
Kind of one thing that I want to do here is I want to kind of talk about like how you got into this business. You know, you're a veteran. Thank you for your service. Like, how was that? How was your service time kind of molded you into who you are today? And, you know, how did you get into, you know, the PA side? I mean, I think you spoke briefly on it earlier, working, you know, you were already in contracting and everything.
So I got medicaled out in 2012, and that's a whole story for another day. So I was in the Army from 2001 to 2012. So I was in the middle of basic training on September 11th in 2001. So everything changed. When I joined, like nothing was going on, right? It was like, I'm going to go get some college money. I'm going to get a guaranteed paycheck at 18. Like life's going to be good. And then 3 weeks into basic training, September 11th happened and everything went to crap after that.
Where were you at in basic training?
Fort Knox.
Okay.
And then we got fast tracked through my individual training at Fort Lee. And then I went to Fort Campbell. I was in the 101st for 10 years. And I did all 4 deployments with them. And I got moved out to Fort Carson, Colorado, and got medicaled out from there with some back issues. For about 2 years, I just kind of floated around and couldn't really figure out what was the path for me. I tried a little bit of everything. I worked for ADT installing security systems. I drove truck for FedEx for a little while. I drove car parts around in Texas and then landed at a roofing company in 2014. Yeah. And I went out to try and be a door-to-door roof salesman and figured out very quickly that's not my jam. I'm very good at the operations and logistics of things. And so I ended up moving into the operations manager of that company, and they went from being like a negative $1 million in the hole when we started there to Inc. magazine's like fastest growing construction companies in the country. And then the owners got in trouble, and I think one of them went to jail for money laundering or something. And Hurricane Harvey hit, and I started working for a disaster mitigation company. Same situation where I fell more into the operations side. But because of that, I was always arguing with insurance companies, and then you could do it. Like then there wasn't, that line didn't exist. If you could call and be like, no, their policy says this, and you guys need to pay for this. And then about late 2018, early 2019, they started passing all these laws that said there's a line that contractors can go up to because technically insurance policies are a legal binding contractual document. So who can interpret legal documents? Well, they either need to be a policy expert or they need to be a lawyer. So that's how the UPPA stuff came into play. And I was working a $37 million church in Greenville, Texas, and they were pushing back and pushing back and pushing back. And that church ended up settling at like 24 million, which is still a massive number, right? But when you take off the difference, it makes a huge impact on the contractor. And so once leaving there, I did one more hurricane after that. And I was like, screw this. I'm tired of getting shafted by the carriers. I'm going to go open a PA firm, get my PA license, because every PA that I had run across was garbage. And so I was like, I'm going to go do this and do it better. And the thing that worked well for me was that I had already had this experience in commercial claims, but I had also already been in the contractor space. So we had done a little bit of everything. I had been in roofing. I had been in large commercial roofing. I had been in water mitigation and fire mitigation, and I had done all of these things. So being a PA, I already knew an angle for a lot of these arguments. And then that massive Dallas freeze happened, and we just skyrocketed from there because we were one of few PAs that actually understood how to do water claims. And so we just kind of kept motoring along there. And we've been doing that ever since. And I found that I'm a lot better at organizing the chaos than actually dealing with a lot of the claims. So I very rarely run a claim. We have really good PAs that do that for us. And so now I do the fractional consulting stuff, and I step in and have these conversations on the PA's behalf because I know the space. I feel like there's better people to handle a claim than me.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
It's like I can own a roofing company. I'm not nailing shingles on your roof,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Kind of thing.
That's why I try to tell people you don't want me putting shingles up there. So
yeah, that's right.
You're not.
There's certain claims that I'm probably the better suited to do, but like Betty Sue's house down the street, I'm not the one. I'm not the one for that. We've got guys who are really, really good at that and will handle it really quickly. I have too much empathy, I think, a lot of times. So I get too involved with these people, and that's why commercial claims always worked well for me, because I'm dealing with some guy in California who might show up to his property once every 5 years.
Right.
I don't have to deal with them. There's no emotion behind it. You're eliminating a lot of that back and forth for no reason.
So were you in some combat? I mean, you were in some combat while you served?
I was. Yeah. So I did Iraq in 2003, Iraq in 2005, Afghanistan in 2008, and Iraq in 2009. And then got out in 2012.
Okay.
I actually I was a quartermaster by MOS, so I was a fueler, and I was in an Apache helicopter battalion for 7 years, and our sister unit was the 160th guys from Black Hawk Down.
Okay.
And so we were always doing missions that were in support of those guys, which meant we were in places that, as a fueler, I didn't expect to be, right? So when I joined, the recruiter was like, you want to drive this truck over trees in a swamp, and you want to do cool kid stuff? And I was like, hell yeah, I do. I never did any of that. But I got to drive a fuel tanker through Baghdad, and they love to shoot at those things. And I've done helicopter missions, and we've been attached to lurch teams, and it was a cool gig, just kind of based on the unit that we were in. I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by really cool people, and got to experience stuff that most people with my MOS and specialty would have not. But also went through stuff that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. So it's a mixed bag, but it also makes you who you are. And I was having this conversation with a buddy of mine the other day, because I get to be the one a lot of times that the guys that I served with call when they're down, when they're having struggles, when somebody dies, whatever it is. I'm usually one of the guys that gets the call. And one of my buddies was kind of down and beating himself up the other day, and I told him, I said, you don't get to enjoy the good things in life without facing the devil every once in a while, right? Like you don't get to go through life without having to deal with shit and expect it to still be just great and rainbows all the time. I said, so you take the lows because they make the highs feel that much better, and you find happiness in those little things. But we also end up being really, really stoic in that sense, which kind of goes in line with our conversation this morning when we were on the phone. It's like when my youngest goes, well, Dad, you didn't get Christmas presents. I'm like, okay, I'm cool with that, right? Because I got to see all this. I was fortunate enough to be here, and I have friends that aren't.
Right.
So you just kind of take it all in stride.
How old are your kids?
My oldest is 17, and my youngest is 12. He'll be 13 in February.
So did you 17? I'm trying to do some.
My oldest was alive for 2 of my deployments. Okay. My youngest was born 2 years or a year and a half after my last deployment. Okay. So my oldest was he was 6 months old when I went to Afghanistan, and he was a year and 9 months or so when I went to Iraq the second time, or the fourth time. My fourth deployment, third trip to Iraq. Yeah.
So fortunately, he
doesn't remember much, but he got to a point, I'd say probably 3 or 4 years ago, where he started asking questions. Yeah. And it was the typical questions, right? It's like, have you killed anybody? Did you see anybody die? Was it hot over there? The combination of questions is so very weird, right? It's like, how was the weather? Were there dead bodies? Did things blow up? Like, it's this weird combination of things. And but he got to the point where he started asking some of those questions, and I said, buddy, you're not old enough yet. And his mom and I are divorced, and I guess we're probably civil is probably the best way to put it now. But I guess he had gotten plenty of stories from her about what that looked like from her perspective. And so obviously he's going to have questions. I told him, I said, when you're 18, we'll have some some deeper conversations. I said, because one of the things that you'll figure out is that guys who went through a lot of shit are not going to talk to you about it. I don't care who you are. Yep. There's stuff that my wife doesn't know to this day. And I think for a period of time that stressed her out. She's like, but I'm your wife. You should trust me with everything. And I'm like, I don't want to relive some of this shit. Same thing with your kids. It's like you shelter them, because I went through this phase where it's like, I don't want whatever image my kids have of me to be changed, good or bad, by what I might tell them coming out of those conversations, right? Because I've seen it happen with friends growing up. I had guys that I grew up with who I come back from war and they're like, you're different. You're an asshole all the time. I'm like, if you went through some of the stuff that I went through, you'd have a different perspective on things as well. But then also you'd get those guys who are like, you just think you're this badass and you're so tough and whatever. And it's like, no, I just went through stuff that hopefully you never have to go through. And it changes you as a person. And so then you make a choice of, am I going to let this affect me adversely, or am I going to use it to be uplifting and advocate for people? And that was a tough transition for me too. It didn't happen for me until October of 22. One of the guys that I served with committed suicide, and I got the call, just like I always do. And that one, it got me because he drove out from his house, sat on a bridge for hours. Like, they pulled his cell phone records and his GPS location had him sitting out there for hours, and then just jumped. And in those hours, he called nobody. And that was like, why not? Why didn't you call? I would have answered. I don't care what time it is. Like, call me. And I beat myself up about that one for quite some time. And my wife was like, you either need to turn it off or turn it all the way on. And like, you either need to start advocating and being open about the stuff that you've been through and the struggles you've had, or you need to just stop talking about it. And so I chose to do what I'm doing now, where it's like, if I get an opportunity to talk about it, I talk about it. But there's still those things that I don't put out publicly. There's those things that I don't openly talk about because it's nobody's business. And again, I don't want certain things that may come out of my mouth to change how people see me. But also, every veteran goes through this. They either have this overinflated version of what they went through, or this underinflated. And they have this idea of like, if we're all sitting in a room, I'm going to look at you and be like, Bob, you went through a lot more shit than I have. And you're like, no, I haven't. There's that version. Or hey, let me tell you about all the stuff that I did. Right. Most of us live in the middle of that. And I just don't feel like getting into that pissing match with a lot of people. So.
Well, and one thing that I've learned, and I'll say this, I've never done any kind of, combat, any kind of military service. So, but one thing I've learned over the last couple of years is like, we had to really be intentional about what story we tell ourselves. Because we were all traumatized. We all struggle from something that happened in our childhood.
Something happened to everybody.
I mean, everyone.
Yep.
And, like you said, you have the oversharers that it's like, poor me. And then you have the people that won't talk about it at all. And the people get tired of, in my opinion, the oversharers. But then like the person that won't talk about it,
there's like frustration there.
There's value there, because like people need to hear that. Like people need to hear your story,
Yeah. I went through that, and I don't know if you probably haven't, but I did Eric's show.
Okay.
And that was a lot of what I think drew him into having me on the show, is that a lot of the guys on his show were recovering alcoholics or addicts or whatever. And mine was about trauma. Yep. And I said, try being addicted to adrenaline, right? You don't come down from that quick and easy. But I told him, I said, the problem for a lot of people is that my generation of service members and the generation right before me is probably the worst. And I'll catch some flack from that from somebody, I'm sure. But the guys who served between Desert Storm and the OEF, OIF campaigns, nothing happened unless they were in Grenada or Somalia. But those are really isolated things. Nothing happened. So they didn't get the attention from the public that our generation got. I don't want that attention, quite frankly, but we still get it. And I remember coming back, and the reason I didn't mean to cut you off, but the reason I did is it was important to what you were saying, is when I came back, when I got medicaled out after 4 deployments, I was struggling with that sense of self-worth. I was struggling with loss, the survivor's guilt, and some of these other things. And my dad was a corpsman in Vietnam. And to this day, does not talk to me about shit. And when I came home from my 4th one, I was like, I need somebody that I can talk to that has been through something comparable. I didn't have anybody because I'd done 4 years, and at that point, really nobody else around me had. Now I have guys that I know that have done 5 and 6 years in, but just because they were in longer. And so I went to my dad, and my dad would not talk to me about it, and it was a point of contention for me. I just remember being so mad at him, and finally my mom came to me, and she's like, he remembers what it felt like when he was going through that, and he didn't want you boys to go through that. And then I'm the youngest. She goes, and then you did it. And not only did you do it, you went full ham into it. And then my older brother joined 5 years after I did, and he's still in the Air Force. And she's like, and you guys just went completely into it, and he doesn't know how to rationalize that. That's the part that people miss, right? I can sit here and tell you the stories about my trauma, but how it affects me only affects me. Mm-hmm. The trauma that you may have dealt with when you were a kid or an adult, or, my wife and I have conversations about this quite often because she's been through some stuff that I kind of sit back and I'm like, Jesus, how do you handle that? Right. But she does the same to me. Right. So how we validate or invalidate each other's stuff is part of the reason that a lot of people don't talk, right? Because everybody's going to have an opinion about how there is. But to your point, the stories need to be told too, right? Like there's a soldier that died in my arms in 2010, and I can't, for the life of me, bring myself to go to her headstone because I'm scared to death that I'll run into her family. And I don't want to tell that story because whatever version they got is probably not the version that I have, right? And I don't want to have to live that scenario again. But at some point, I'm probably going to because it's what needs to happen. Right. Right. But how do you tell somebody the version that they thought of this scenario for the last 10, 15 years is potentially wrong? Mm-hmm. So you don't want to invalidate the way that maybe they've already gotten their closure, and you don't want to open it back up. So it's a mixed bag,
Yeah, grief is just, it's a mixed bag
because there's no right way to handle it. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of wrong ways to handle it, but there's no right way to handle it. And that's why so many people deal with addiction and things like that. And luckily, I've been able to skip over that, and knock on wood, I've never had the suicidal things that a lot of guys that I've served with have. And but if you don't think the depression and the anxiety and the struggle and all that would just like with anybody else exist, you're crazy. Right. It's just like, how much do you let that weigh you down? And some days it brings you to a halt, and then some days you can just carry it on, and you just get to pick and choose every morning. That's the cool part.
Right. All right.
Well, we just brought the mood down, didn't we?
It's like, no idea how I'm going to follow that.
Look, but it characterizes a lot of people in the construction industry, right? Because most people don't end up here because things were going great for them. Right. Most people didn't end up in the construction industry because they grew up going, when career day was happening in elementary school, they're like, I want to be a roofer. It just didn't happen. Most of us landed here because something went wrong. Some string of things was unfortunate, and we had to dig ourselves out of a hole or out of addiction or debt or whatever it was. And so every one of us is carrying some form of shit with us, and we have to be accepting of that for other people. But then when we're in a position where, and I think this is where you and I connect a lot, when you're in a position to positively impact people, you go out of your way to do that, because that pays you back tenfold. It doesn't undo any wrongdoings you've ever done. It doesn't undo the shit that's happened to you. But if it can reduce the weight that somebody else is carrying, then you go out of your way to do it.
Well, and we're all here to make money. That's what makes this world go round. But the highly successful that I've learned, like, there was pain to it. There was a rhyme or reason. Like, there are people that say, I'm going to start a roofing company because I know you can make really good money. However, I've watched some of them, and they're still not in the roofing space.
Right.
They get burnt out. They don't understand what they're actually getting into.
Yeah.
So there has to be that shift where it's like, I want to help people out.
I think every successful business owner I've met in the last 10 years or so ends up in, if they're successful, ends up in that space where it's like, I've done enough for myself.
Right.
I'm going to start pouring out into other people or into my community, into my church, whatever it is, whatever that thing is for you. Yep. They always find it.
Right.
Right. Or they get stuck in neutral and they're just kind of doing their thing. But I think that's really where you define true success and where your legacy lies, right? It's like, how do you, when you die, how are people going to remember you, right? What is it that you're leaving behind? And for some people, that's a really easy answer. And I feel that I want to get to that point. I don't know that I ever will. I don't ever know that I'll be satisfied enough with what the impact that I've had on anybody.
Right.
But maybe I will.
Well, and honestly, I think that's why we connect so well, because there is just that level of like, I heard Ed Milet a few years ago at RoofCon and read most of his books and listened to his podcast quite a bit. And he says that the day he meets his maker, when he meets God, he wants God to show him a picture of what he could have been. And he wants to see that version. Like, literally, like, the saying, if you play football or leave it all out on the field, like, holy cow, like that resonates with me. Like, it's so much bigger than a roofing company. And I tell the team that all the time.
Right.
We hired Ellie, and, I don't pay Ellie. I wish I could pay Ellie more. You know what I mean?
Right.
But when we hired her, she was working 2 almost full-time jobs.
Right.
One during the day and practically one halfway through the night. And she got to work one job, and she got to be a mom at night. And her mom, thankfully, was helping her with the kids at night when she was working that second job. But, like, that's what gets me going. That's an
impact.
Because, like, okay, now them kids have their mom back.
Yep.
Like, you talk about a legacy, and I say this all the time, like, I want a legacy that, one generation from, I always think of, and now we're starting to have more little kids, but I always think of little Joey as one of my sales reps' stepson technically, but he's raising him as his son. And, like, Joey's kids are going to be positively affected by what me and Emily's doing here. And that Joey's kids will probably never know who Bob and Emily Hoel is.
Right.
However, like, the legacy that I could, like that's what I get. And only people that are truly in business to actually make a difference, like, understand it. Like, some people say, well, look at that nice truck. Okay, but 6 years ago when I was driving a rusted truck that wouldn't start half the time.
And I know a lot of guys who still have that truck.
Yes.
Right? They just won't get rid of it.
Yep.
It's sitting, I sat with a contractor last week, and he's like, when I drive, every once in a while, I'll just hop in the 88 Chevy.
Yep.
And I'll drive it, and I'll pull up to a job site, and the crews will look at me and be like, the hell's this guy doing? He goes, but that's how I ground myself. And I'm like, hey, good for you. Like, good for you for keeping that piece of your own legacy intact, right? Of, like, never losing sight of where you came from is huge. And, for some people, it is the material things. Some people, it's all those things, but they grow out of them.
Right.
The amount of guys I've seen that have gone out and bought Ferraris and mansions and do all this other stuff, at some point, a switch gets flipped and they're like, yeah, I don't really care about this stuff anymore. Like, I want to give back to somebody. I want to go do something really cool for people, and that's it, right? And to, like you said, some of these people are never going to know your name. Right. And that's okay.
Well, right? And what the point I've gotten to now is, like, I want to take care of my wife. Like, just build her a really nice home. And nothing, like, to me, it's really nice, but nothing that's crazy, you know, like, we could have built a lot bigger one, and that's just who we are. You know,
Right.
it works for us.
Yeah.
You know, and like I said, it's still a really nice home. I mean, this is the first house that we've been able to fit a pickup truck in the actual garage. So,
Which is crazy, right?
Yeah. The funny part is, like, our garage is bigger than our first house ever was, you know? So, but you know, that's where I'm at on that kind of stuff. Kind of like what you said about Christmas gifts and that kind of stuff. Like, you know, like I want, I've always said this, and maybe I shouldn't say this out in public, but I'll say it. Like, I want people jealous of how well I take care of my wife. Like,
You've
you
said
know,
that to me. Yeah.
Like,
and I can appreciate that.
That's what, like, I want. And my wife isn't materialistic.
Right.
Now, would she rather drive a fairly new truck or a 25-year-old truck every day? She'd rather drive a newer truck, you know. But when you step back and said something about that guy that drives that 88 truck, my crew is driving the first diesel truck that I bought when we started the business. And I've told them, and I've told everybody, when they're done with it, that thing's coming back to me, and that's just going to be my farm put around truck. Like, you know, that to me, like, you know, and it was actually perfect. I sold the first truck that I bought to help pull trailers to my brother, and he showed up to watch my kids. My son had a cattle show this fall, and he parked right beside my wife's new truck I just bought her, and I just snapped a picture of it. Yeah. Because I'm like, there's where it began. You know, there's where we're at now. And like I said, fortunately, Emily's not a materialistic person, because like you said, like, that stuff gets old. But I hate the people that hate on the people that have something nice, because there is nothing wrong with having something nice. And one thing that always cracks me up is, like, when people complain about the people that have stuff nice. Like, I know some people that have some nice things, and I also know the amount of money that they donate to charity and stuff. Right. And it's like, okay, like, you know, what I've come to is, like, I've got to keep that kind of stuff, like, at a balance. Yeah. Like, you know, like, there's nothing wrong with this, but I've got to make sure that I'm giving, you know, way more than I'm receiving.
Well, and there's that old saying too. It's like, nobody who's ahead of you is ever going to be the one criticizing you, right? Like, and there's some person that's yep. And that's right. And it's that must be nice mentality. Yep. Like, it is nice. Yep. But you also didn't see the years that it took for me to get here. Right. You also didn't see, you know, the times that, I mean, Amy and I joke about it, because there was a point, 7 years ago, that me and two buddies stood in a kitchen splitting up like $380, because that was all that we had between the three of us, because we hedged a bet on going down for this contract, and we lost it, and everybody lost everything. And we stood in the kitchen counting ones and 20s, and we're like, all right, guys, so it's been real. I'm going to go move back in with my in-laws, because I'm on my third failure, you know. And, you know, I'm with you though. Like, I have my priorities, right? And so I want everybody to envy Amy and I's relationship. I want everybody to look and be like, that dude loves the shit out of that woman, because she has lived with me through, she came in post all of my deployments, single dad, and she's put up with my PTSD and all the shit that's come along with that. And then me not being able to fall into the 9 to 5, 40-hour a week job, to random, let's go try make money selling widgets, you know, whatever it is, and ending up here. And we've outgrown the financial capacity of, like, my entire family, with the exception of one or two people. And we get to look at that, and we get well, must be nice. Right. Well, it is. And so Amy's the same way, not materialistic at all, never asks for shit. And then one year she's like, I think I want a Louis Vuitton purse. And I was like, I got you. Right. And now she's got a couple, but she has like 6 fake ones. And everybody's like, oh, look at all these. I'm like, that one's fake, and that one's fake, and that one's fake, and that was $30, and that was $60. And people don't see it. They just see the shit that goes along with it. But our industry is so materialistic too. And we do so many conventions that if your wife isn't walking through there with a Louis or red bottoms or something, there are people who won't work with you. Right. And while you don't want to work with them long term, sometimes they're a foot in the door to some other stuff, and you kind of got to play the game sometimes, but it's obnoxious. And the amount of roofers that I see posting pictures of shingles, and they're like this, and it's their Rolex, and they want to make sure that you see that they have the Rolex, and be like, look at these shingles. And you're like, yeah, man, we know it's the Rolex. We got it. It's no different.
It's funny because I got a watch, this Apple Watch on with 2 different colored bands right now.
Listen, I'm going to need you to step your game up.
Well, and that actually will kind of lead into this. Like, what is that one failure that you did? And I will start with mine. And it's more just, I mean, it'll make us laugh until we about fall out of a freaking chair here. But so I wanted to go work for myself. I wanted to own my own business. Emily knew that when we got together. My dad raised me have an 8 to 5 and have, a side hustle, always be working. That was before side hustles were cool, know, and I always baled hay, fed cattle. I'm a farm kid at heart. Never really made any money, just really enjoyed working my ass off for nothing, apparently, Right. But so we were trying to figure out what did that look like? And so I signed up to do this property cleaning up and doing things for foreclosed houses.
Okay.
And the first one we get assigned, I believe at this point, I'm selling roofing for a company in Indy, and my son was still he was less than a year old.
Okay.
And we get the first assignment's an hour and a half south of here. And it's supposed to be there's a few things tarp the roof, do this, do that. And I'm like, okay, we can do that. And I get there and I wasn't prepared at all. I mean, overgrown, and then they have these pay sheets. It's how are these guys making any money at all? And I couldn't even tarp the roof because something else was wrong that had to be done first. Or I think they were going to have to bring a guy in to fix something structurally or something. But anyways, I go out there and I look at Emily. I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here, and I call back and the lady with a straight face is like, okay, yeah, we can get that done. So you can come back and finish this. He's like, but there is a fecal removal on this sheet and it pays $6. It was a toilet with no water that somebody had decided to take a dump in. And I was to clean that out
for $6.
For $6. So every once in a while, a couple times a year, when me and Emily are just ready to scream at something, we look at each other and say it could be worse. We could be cleaning shit out of a toilet for $6.
That's interesting. That's funny though, because you couldn't make that up if you had to.
And everybody sees the success of a roofing business. And literally I seen a guy 2 days ago and he's like, I'm proud of you. And I said, thank you. I used to be super humble. I wouldn't say much, but now I make sure I say thank you for that compliment, but they don't know the things that you tried before.
Oh, 100%.
That were a complete failure,
Yep. So I definitely have one, probably plenty. The biggest, and I'll go biggest from a financial impact. Which I spent years trying to get Amy out of the 9 to 5 mentality because the whole time we dated and got together, she was a pharmacy technician, so she was always at a CVS working, and she made decent money for what it was. But it was always that look of I'm doing what the pharmacist does, and the pharmacist is making $150,000 a year, and I'm making 50. What in the world's going on? So that always bothered me for her, and so I was like. When we started the PA firm, we started it together, but she was relatively she didn't know the industry, so she only interjected herself where she felt necessary. And so we were 2 years into the PA firm, and I was like, babe, you got this, you understand how business run. I said, there's an opportunity with this hurricane. We should start an industrial hygiene company because we used industrial hygienists on so many water claims because we want a professional with a stamp to come in and say, this is mold, this is this type of mold, this is whatever. I said, we have some certified IH people that we could use. We'll start a LLC and we'll go in and we'll solicit some work in the hurricane. It'll be great, right? And so we did. And I said, I'm going to be hands off. You just let me know if you need my help, or whatever, which I can't help myself. I was very much hands on. And she's like, hey, I'm going to fire this dude. His name was Trevor. She's like, I'm going to fire Trevor. I think he's screwing us. And I was like, no, he knows what he's doing. He did not know what he was doing. So that IH company made $1.3 million in 90 days. And we were like, oh shit, we figured it out. Like, this is our ticket. We don't even have to do the PA firm anymore. This IH thing's going to kill it. 60 days later, we had $0 because a lot of the contracts were written fraudulently by Trevor. And the stuff that we were paying for that was going to the labs to get tested weren't actually going to the labs. He was taking the money and doing whatever. And then one of the contractors sued us. And so I got Amy off the cusp of like, I don't ever want to own my own business, to doing it, making $1 million in 90 days, losing more than $1 million in the 60 days following. And then a company came in who wanted the brand, which I thought was really weird. They offered Amy to take over all of the debt and the lawsuit in exchange for 100% equity in the company. And they're like, sign here, walk away, we'll take over everything. And she's like, I just feel like it's a failure. I'm like, it is, but it's like the best case scenario failure that you could have. And to this day, she doesn't let me live it down. She's like, remember that time that we did this? I'm like, I know. So I've had to be a lot more restrictive on who I bring into our life. But we have this story forever. It's like, remember that time we made $1 million in 90 days? And then lost it in less than 90 days? They lost $1.5 million
in 2 days or 2 months. Yeah. But no,
But those are the things that people don't see. Right?
Oh, yeah.
They think that it's just like, oh, you guys are, they see the nicer cars. Right. And it's like, I don't want to have to do maintenance on a car anymore. Right. I spent my entire 20s and part of my 30s changing brakes in the driveway, doing all like, oh man, I blew a head gasket. I remember living in government or the base housing, government housing, in Fort Carson, taking apart a 3600 Pontiac motor because I blew a head gasket, making $30,000 a year trying to do that on my own because I couldn't afford to pay a mechanic to do it. Like now I'm just like, no, I'm going to just buy a nicer vehicle that I don't have to deal with this shit anymore. Like I just don't want to, because I'm doing other stuff that the last thing I want to do is be sitting out here unless I want to do it. Like right. if I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna put a lift kit on something or whatever. Like I did that on her last Tahoe she had. I was like, I'm going to put a lift on this. So I ordered it and I put it on myself with a buddy of mine because I wanted to.
Right.
It wasn't a necessity thing. I'm not breaking down the side of the road. Anytime I see somebody broke down the side of the road, I'm like, I don't envy you.
Well, it's funny because we've got heated seats in a couple of the trucks. Mm-hmm. And my dad told me one day, he's like, your kids are spoiled. He said, they got in my truck and asked to turn on the heated seat or something. And I started laughing because my dad's probably never had a vehicle with a heated seat on it. Mm-hmm. But I said, kids, you're lucky. I said, growing up, I said, the trucks didn't hardly have heat in them. I said, there was 5 of us kids that would stack deep with dad in a standard cab truck. I said, mm-hmm. So we generated our own heat. Yep. And, and it's always funny, to swap them stories with the kids. But as we wrap up, I guess one thing that I'm just going to drive home, you kind of brought it up, like when you marry well, because I think you got to marry well before you want to necessarily do this. But mentor friend Dave Ramsey says, like, if your wife has a feeling, you should trust that feeling. And, you pretty much solidified that. And thankfully, Emily sounds very similar to Amy, where she doesn't like bringing up every day, but, there is this.
It's right on time.
Yep. There are them times, and like we even look back of like, hires and stuff like that. And she's like, hey, and that is one. I had one particular hire that she's like, I told you not to hire that person.
And I think everybody has those people too, right? Where it's like, for whatever reason, you relegated yourself to being like, I got this one right. I do. And then you end up being completely wrong. But then that ex-girlfriend theory exists with everybody. When that cancerous person's gone, everybody comes out of the woodwork. They're like, we knew. They're like, why didn't you freaking say anything?
Right.
The only person that ever does is probably your wife.
Right.
Because And Amy's the same way. She does not miss me. She's like, I don't like this person. Because there's people that I do business with now where we'll be sitting there having dinner and she'll go, if they say it to you, they're going to say it to everybody else. Just keep that in mind. And I'm like, yeah, I understand, sweetheart, but she's not wrong.
Right.
So, but I tried twice and failed the marriage thing and got it right the third time. So it's fine. Amy and I have been together for this will be 14 years in June. And like, we finally figured it out. The first two were a joke.
Good. When's your anniversary?
June 20th.
So ours is July 9th. It'll be 14 years. July 9th. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's 7/9/11. That's how I
wish I had something easy like that to remember.
Being a numbers guy, that works for me.
Right.
So
that's fair.
But yeah, appreciate your time today, sir, and appreciate your friendship and your willingness to always help us out.
Yeah, this has been awesome. I appreciate you having me up.
Yep. Thank you. This has been an edition of the Whole Truth podcast brought to you by Hoel Roofing and Remodeling. Thank you for joining in.